All right, you should be good to go, Ashley.
Okay, thank you. So I want to just start by thanking Brian for putting together an agenda for us. Alice also sent out minutes this morning, and I don't know if we distributed those. Brian, did you by any chance forward those? I did not.
No, I did not. I guess those were the minutes from the Issues Committee meeting in January.
Oh, for the charge.
That just had the charge.
Okay,
Yeah, that was
okay,
just
I'm sorry. So then the group has the minutes that we need to approve today. Okay, great. So so we'll get to that in just a minute, but I would like to go ahead and just take a moment. Let's go around and introduce ourselves very quickly. So I'm Ashley Campbell. I'm the chair of this subcommittee. And Brian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Brian Oten with your Ethics Council, staff to the committee.
And you want to call on someone, and then we'll just rotate around the room?
We'll go to Matt Smith.
Well, thank you, Brian. Matt Smith, Vice President. And I'm going to send it to Evan, who's the next on my screen.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. This is Evan Rawls from Charlotte.
All right, Evan, you get to choose someone.
Now, do I pass it on to Clark? I guess I do. Clark, you're it.
Thank you, Evan. I'm Clark Bell from Randolph County, Judicial District 37, the counselor. And I'll send it to Alan LaCroix.
Hi, everybody. Alan LaCroix from Morganton. Glad to be here. I guess I'll recognize Catherine. I see her up there.
Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine Jean in the Office of Counsel at the State Bar. It's nice to see you all. Oh, I need to pick someone. I'm sorry.
Yes.
It didn't look like Alice or Barry is here.
Yeah, I think Alice and Barry are having some connection issues. So we'll let them introduce themselves when they join. I think Marcy has not been called on though.
Oh my heavens, Marcy, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was trying to hide a little bit. Anyway, hi, I am your president for about another month. Yay!
Oh my gosh, that went so fast.
Woo, yeah, we've done a lot though. Done a lot.
Oh, wow, congratulations.
I'm looking forward to being in that supporting role.
The jury's still out about it lasting that or making it that quickly. Some of us think it lasted a long time.
They've had a hard time, Matt and Todd, keeping me straight. They're worn slam out.
So Barry and Alice are now on the screen. So we'll let Barry introduce himself and then Alice.
Hi, I'm Barry McNeil, Deputy Counsel here at the State Bar. Good to see everybody.
You too, Barry.
Hello, everyone. Alice Vine, Executive Director, and I'm Brian's assistant on this committee.
And Daryl, good afternoon. We just finished our introductions. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. I'm sorry, I'm running between meetings here. I'm Daryl Davidson, practicing stage 4. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here. I'm sorry I missed the last one.
It's good to see you.
You
So
too.
I think we got everybody, didn't we?
Okay.
Yes.
Great to see you all again. Thank you for being here again. Thank you for Brian for distributing the agenda. Of course, it contained the report that he prepared and of the, I guess that's minutes, really. It's the report of the meetings of the issue subcommittee. Do you consider those to be your minutes?
Yeah, and actually, before we get to that, do you think we could read the State Ethics Act statement?
Yes.
That'd be great.
So members of the subcommittee are advised of their duty under the State Ethics and Government Act to avoid conflicts of interest and are instructed to refrain from participating in any matter coming before the subcommittee with respect to which there is a conflict. So please do refrain if you have a conflict or let us know that you have a conflict. Thank you, Brian. So Brian sent around the report from August 21, 2023. I hope you all had an opportunity to look at that. And if someone would like to make a motion to approve it, I will consider it. Okay, Alan made a motion. And I think Evan is trying to second it. Yes. All in favor? A thumb is great. Okay, great. Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes and the report is accepted. So now we're moving really into the heart of the matter, which is a discussion sort of about, what we've done, what we've accomplished so far. And then also I'd like for us to talk about the succession planning for lawyers document, 3-page document that Brian prepared, which I thought was really terrific. So Brian, is it okay if I turn it over to you for just a short sort of summary of what we've done and any additional thoughts you have before we engage in that discussion?
Absolutely. So to this point, you all know we started this subcommittee trying to educate ourselves on the importance of succession planning, understanding what the bar has to do when a succession plan is not in place. And that was, kind of, I guess, really started the conversation. You remember our last meeting with the folks from Lawyers Mutual, hearing about their efforts. And I thought Julie Beavers summarized it very well, where she said, there's a couple of different aspects of succession planning. There's the actual wind down, closing of your practice that they assist with. There's the transition of the practice to a new lawyer, maybe even selling the practice or coming up with some sort of counsel arrangement, whatever it may be. And then there's kind of those emergency situations when suddenly someone is unavailable and there's no opportunity to, or I guess you say there's nobody there to really take up the mantle, so to speak, or even just to wind things down because they don't know how the lawyer organized their office, where are their active clients, things of that nature. And so we started off by talking about, the concept of succession planning, and then looking at, should we, the state bar, mandate succession planning? Looked at a couple of different jurisdictions that do require succession plans for their lawyers as a matter of professional responsibility. And then, but of course, there's some other jurisdictions that have a voluntary program. I think the discussion really kind of focused on the voluntary aspect. We talked about some of the concerns with the mandatory program, but it seemed that the subcommittee arrived at the conclusion that a voluntary opportunity would be helpful. And I know to that end, we've started conversations with our database programmers, our new state bar database, and the programmers to see if we would be able to create some sort of almost kind of membership data entry point for folks to sign into their membership portal and to identify somebody who is there. We were calling that person an inventory lawyer. It's just really a point of contact, a first place to start for the state bar in those emergency situations where a lawyer suddenly and unexpectedly becomes unavailable. This person would know where the keys to the garage are, that sort of just kind of logistical, functional information. And of course, we talked about educational efforts as well. We're not looking at a mandatory process. We want to encourage succession planning, and there's a number of different educational things that we can talk about. We talked about CLEs and resources and so forth. But I guess that's something where, we're kind of, we had a lot of good conversations. And now the question is there any other aspect of succession planning that the subcommittee wants to explore? Is there, I'm not even sure, I don't want to just kind of speculate wildly, but wanted to kind of open up the conversation of the subcommittee to see if, do we feel like we have a general idea of the importance of succession planning and what recommendations this subcommittee might want to make to the council in terms of any sort of state bar action on succession plans, or if there's something else that we really need to learn about before we arrive at a point where we feel confident with any sort of conclusions.
So any response or discussion from the group? Thank you, Brian. Hi, Evan.
Hey, one thing I was thinking about earlier this morning as I was reading the agenda for this was whether or not lawyers that petition for inactive status actually have their offices and cases and their finances and their trust accounts and everything in order. And so I kind of was drifting towards the idea that there needed to be a certification from those lawyers that apply for inactive status, that they've met certain benchmarks maybe that, Barry gave us that PowerPoint presentation that I thought was, very logically organized, and it really kind of set things out. But it seems like that might be an entree into publicizing this by asking those lawyers applying for inactive to give a certification as to, as you say, that the keys to the garage are passed on, or the garage is cleaned out and locked and there's nothing left in the garage. But that's just an idea.
Barry, do you have any thoughts about that?
Even I hadn't thought about that. That's a very good idea, that if we had, to concentrate on those attorneys that are seeking inactive status, to, as part of that process, have them designate somebody. I think that would be an excellent way to promote this whole idea.
Yeah,
I will add, though, actually, I just got back from a workshop where dealing with client protection, the national group, and of course Iowa, I think, has taken this whole mandatory approach rather than a voluntary approach, and they are touting that. But I think their experience is very still in the early stages, and not a whole lot of feedback yet about how successful they're going to be with this, mandatory approach. But I will say that the council up there for the Iowa bar that deals with this has said, hey, if you want us to come down and speak to North Carolina about this, we'd be more than happy to do so. Her name is Trinity Braun Arana. But if that's the case, she would come down and speak and tell us about their experience.
And I know you sent an email around 11 o'clock with some slides. Is that from that presentation?
That was
Okay.
part of our
Great.
protection. Yeah.
So everyone in this meeting will have a copy of that in your email if you want to look at that later.
Yeah, I was going to add, for one, Eben, you're right about maybe having some opportunity with inactive status. The form for inactive status, I'm going to share my screen real quick so we're looking at the same thing here. But you can see here, this is the form for folks that want to petition for inactive status. And there's a little blurb here that does kind of address what you were talking about to some extent, but it doesn't go as far as maybe our subcommittee probably thinks it should. You can see number 6 there, that it's saying, I understand if I'm granted inactive status and I cannot practice or serve as of counsel, effective as of this date, I'm granted inactive status. I have properly withdrawn from representation of all clients, and with regard to matters in litigation, I have followed the court's protocol for withdrawal. So there's kind of an affirmation by the petitioner that they have withdrawn, but it's not talking about closing down the practice. And it's not, I think, even in the page before this petition, or at least the part where you can fill out, that's an opportunity for some information about succession planning, for when somebody actually pulls up this form and they say, this is what I want to do. I'm going to read through the instructions. And the instructions currently are really focused on kind of the administrative effect of going inactive. But that really is a good opportunity to highlight succession planning in whatever form we want to focus. So that's a part of, additional opportunities for education, right? I think it's a great idea.
Other thoughts or feedback about that issue, or whether you think we've explored sort of the question enough and are ready to make some recommendations, or anything else? DeMarcy?
Hey, thank you guys so much. This is so important. We had a lawyer here in Johnston County, much loved lawyer, who was in her 50s, that just, died from a heart attack, had not been sick. And I mean, just the importance of this is it's immeasurable, really. But I am of the mindset that we should make it voluntary to start with. I mean, you can always down the road choose to make it mandatory if you want to get more speakers to come in. But I think that honestly, I've been going across the state now for a year talking about this, and I think it's time that they actually see something. It's one thing to go to all the judges' conferences, the clerks' conferences, the district bar meetings that we've been to, all 4 this year across the state, and say, oh, we're working on this. But I really feel like if it's ready, I feel like that we need to show them something. You can always come back and later if you want to, have more discussions, but is it ready to at least put it out there and let them see that we're not just working, that we actually have a product? That's my question.
So thank you for that, Marcy. And Bobby, I saw you come in. I wanted to say hello, welcome. Good to see you. I do, why don't we go ahead and raise this question? Oh, Evan, do you want to make a comment first?
Yeah, just one other kind of idea that I was floating around in the cesspool of my mind this morning was whether or not the LAP people might have an opportunity also to publicize succession planning with respect to those lawyers that seek their help and perhaps are on the edge. And so it's another chance to get out in front of some of the vulnerable lawyers that might succeed at LAP and might not, and might end up failing and hurting clients. So that's just another thought for another forum to publicize it.
Thank you, Evan. So going back to Marcy's question in terms of voluntary or not voluntary, based on our discussions thus far, my takeaway from the group has been that there seems to be consensus that we want this to be a voluntary program for now. And so I'll go ahead and ask the question, does anyone not think it should be a voluntary program, that it should be a mandatory program in some way? So then I think we have consensus that our recommendation to the Issues Committee is that it adopt a voluntary program. Any other discussion or debate around that question? Or do you feel like you need any other information in order to make that decision? Okay, so Brian, we definitely have consensus on that point.
Yes.
And we had also talked about resources. So we had talked about what types of resources do we want to make available to the bar as we encourage them to develop a succession plan, identify an inventory lawyer. And there's been the discussion of the group thus far has been that we shouldn't recreate the wheel, that we should look for other resources that are already out there, like the NCBA Vitality Committee and others, and sort of aggregate those and make those accessible. Does anybody not think that's a good way to approach it and have a different or an alternative proposal for us to consider? Okay, so it looks like we have consensus there as well, that we want to aggregate materials that already exist and make those more available to the bar. The third recommendation that I've not gotten a feel from everyone about yet is the idea of voluntary registration of an inventory lawyer. And Brian, that would be when we paid our dues annually. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we can have it take a number of forms. I think ideally it would be maybe a single page that when somebody goes through and pays their dues and they have to click past it. But that it also remains an option throughout the year. It's not required to pay your dues, but that somebody can come back to it. They may learn about it right then and they don't know who to put just then, but they know it's there and they can come back to it. So yes, I think that would be a part of kind of in light of the consensus of the voluntary aspect of this. Perhaps that would be another recommendation from the subcommittee that we could communicate to the State Bar Council.
Marcy?
Are we going to have a forum? Have y'all developed a forum? Is that something that will need to be done?
It will need to be done. I've reached out to our programmers and they've said that it absolutely is possible. Right now, they're just overwhelmed with the CLE rule changes as well as the launching of the new case management system. So they haven't been able to do it, but they know it's been a request. I wanted to see a format first to be able to show you, but unfortunately they just couldn't put it together. But I think that could be something that this subcommittee and ultimately the council kind of gives us that charge, but it's definitely possible.
I mean, is this your report that you've drafted that we're looking at today?
Yeah, so that's I guess there's kind of two things that I mean, maybe kind of back up and say, I think what our conversation is focused on now would be more of the subcommittee's report and recommendations. And one of the recommendations might be the publication of the thing that I included in the agenda, that resource. That's the one that aggregates all the different things that we've learned. I put this together. This is a draft, a prototype, but it would be this idea of if we want to create some resource. I want to go ahead and just share my screen. So again, we're looking at the same thing, but this is supposed to be a resource that everyone could use. Maybe we put it on the State Bar's website. And I kept it short and sweet per our prior discussions, hoping that, it's just kind of an introduction. It's supposed to get people thinking, right? So it's just kind of a general summary of what a succession plan or why a succession plan is important for lawyers. And then I crafted these kind of first steps. And I want to be clear, if you all think that a different step is required or whatever it may be, please do let me know. We may not need to get into drafting by subcommittee right now, but maybe that's something that we can, if you have additional thoughts, then you can send them to me. But, again, the idea being just to get people thinking about it. And maybe if you just have 5 steps, 5 things to think about, describe your practice. Like what areas of law have you practiced in? Who are your clients? I think, I don't know how many times when I've talked about this type of thing at a CLE, when I've just asked the question, can you identify, or maybe more importantly, can someone else step into your office and identify exactly who your active clients are? And kind of the scared looks that I see staring back at me. And then to tell somebody about your organization method, share it with staff. Maybe this is when you start thinking about the inventory lawyer thing, but just to talk with somebody about how you actually organize your stuff, because maybe you'll find that you can do it better. Thinking about what do you want to happen to your practice? Close down entirely, transfer it, things like that. Just again, getting the thoughts going. And then the last one being this identify an inventory lawyer. If we carry out this recommendation, to have a voluntary form that folks can fill out through the membership portal. So that was just my first kind of thought on how do we get people thinking about it? And also how do we get people to think about it without being immediately overwhelmed? That was the goal here. You'll see on the last page, that we've got additional resources. These are all hyperlinks. So anybody can, and I try to make that clear in the description, that if you just click on any one of these, you'll go to the Bar Associations or Lawyers Mutual's resources. There's other jurisdictions out there, and then ultimately even links to the Lawyers Mutual Consulting Services or the Law Practice Exchange if you need kind of one-on-one help. And of course, always a plug, if you need ethics advice about your professional responsibility, call the bar. So that was the overall structure, 4 pages. Again, not trying to be overwhelming, and just be helpful to get that thought process going.
So Marcy, did you have any other questions about the document?
I just want to make sure that the lawyers know that this isn't just about succession planning in the context of leaving your firm to somebody else. But what I think is the most important thing is identifying somebody that will actually wind it down. So I mean, when you read, I just want to make sure that they don't think that this is just about finding a buyer or somebody to come in and get their firm. That's what I'm a little bit worried about. And that's why I was kind of wondering if we could just.
Well, that's good feedback. We can tweak the language to.
Yep.
I think some
language to potentially talk about 2 scenarios. Daryl?
Yeah, quick. Yeah. I think one of the biggest issues that I sort of see is, an attorney admitting that they need to wind it down, and with the succession planning. I think I've had some questions before regarding attorneys that are still sort of practicing, and bring up the idea of succession planning, and it's like you're trying to force them out. So I'm not sure how we'd be able to really address that portion of it, because quite frankly, I mean, I don't know if we have to identify ones that probably need to wind it down. I don't know how you do that. You know, because this is a voluntary thing, right? I don't see a lot of, just what I've seen, I just don't see a lot volunteering to say, hey, I need to start winding it down, or a succession plan. I could be wrong, but that's been my experience.
Clark?
I was thinking this too, you know, as a bridge to, like, if I'm disabled for a while. It's not necessarily that I'm quitting the practice, but it's not a week vacation either. Say I had surgery and I'm going to be out for several months, then it gives me a way to then bridge my practice for, you know, longer than a vacation, but short of retirement. And the process may be the same, and the persons may be the same. But it gives me a thought that we could, you know, start with retiring lawyers, but it also would be beneficial, I think, for those who are just beginning practice in terms of how to manage their practice. Additionally, I'm all for having this as you know, a page on the membership portal, and also for being able to modify that during the course of the year, either because I hadn't really thought about it, but then I had a medical concern to come up and I might think about it and name someone, or I name someone at the beginning of the year and they become disabled or unable to fulfill that role. So I think the benefit of being able to address that throughout the course of the year would be beneficial.
Evan? And then Alan.
I want to ask Barry, I'm kind of struggling with the term inventory lawyer. It doesn't quite feel like it fits. Did the Iowa folks have a different moniker for their succession lawyer?
Yeah, even I think they use the term receiver there, and some of the other states do use receiver too. Brian, you may be able to speak to this better than I. Are there any others that are using inventory lawyer?
Yeah, I've seen some other states that have used inventory lawyer. I think Michigan was one of those. And I think that's always been kind of the struggle with this, finding the appropriate name. You know, it's not, I won't say it's a PMBR type of problem. What do we call these things? But you know, because it's not appropriate to call this person a successor or anything, because they're not necessarily taking over the practice. The receivership, you know, does that have other sort of legal connotations and all that? And I think that's where I saw some other states use inventory lawyer and thought that was, I guess it's kind of like one of those things. It may not be the best, but it's better than the others. And so we could come up with a different term by all means. I think the point of the inventory lawyer, whoever this is, you know, they are the starting point for the state bar when we need to appoint a trustee. You know, they're not taking over the practice. They're not absorbing the practice. They are just stepping in after appointed to serve in that capacity. But and so that's where, you know, sometimes this person may be the best person to serve as a trustee, but also may not be. You know, maybe they don't have the capacity to actually wind the practice down, but they were somebody that was trusted enough that the lawyer who's now unavailable told this person, you know, hey, they know my practice, they know how I keep things organized, and they're going to be a great resource to whoever is going to be winding down the practice. So that's the idea of the inventory lawyer. If there's another kind of term or moniker, then I'm all ears.
We'll keep talking about that. Bobby has a comment. I don't know if it's on that or something else.
Hey, thanks, Ashley. A couple of thoughts. Seems like we're talking about practice continuity and succession. I don't know if that's a pithy enough name for it, but continuity, I think, is what we're talking about. Not exactly always in a crisis, but sometimes. And then something Clark said, I think it was something Clark said that made me think, are there some similarities here to our secured leave process? The secured leave, I think, is there, largely for the benefit of the lawyers so that, we're protected when we have a planned expected absence. But it does strike me that, and I think this was one of Clark's comments, when I'm gonna be gone for longer than just a vacation. So I don't have a fully formed thought on that, but I wonder if there's some aspects of the secured leave process that may have some relevance here. And that was it.
Does anybody know the answer to that question about if it has, if it's comparable to the secured leave process? And
I think one thing that strikes me about that is, secured leave kind of has a definite ending, whereas these situations, they might and they might not. And so you need somebody. I think that's something we've looked at, these attorneys that have stepped in trustee roles. And sometimes it is, maybe they've stepped in because somebody has to go to like a 30-day treatment, or maybe some other medical situation. And it's that tough thing where the person plans to come back, but there's no telling when the person's coming back. And in the meantime, those clients need assistance. And that can be a really difficult needle to thread in the trustee process, because do you wind something down so somebody has nothing to come back to when you know that they very well could make it back, but it's not certain? It's usually that's where it's been kind of a case-by-case scenario when you're dealing with the trustee process, which primarily focuses on winding everything down and closing the practice up.
Alan?
I think we're going to get more traction here if we tailor this narrowly to death and disability. I think that kind of gets to what Marcy was talking about. Brian, I think that pamphlet is fantastic. But I think it should be succession planning in the case of death or disability first. Because that's something that I've talked with some of my folks around, and they say, yeah, that's important. We can deal with all these other matters, but I think for this purpose, we're better off in focusing on the situations where a lawyer can no longer handle their clients' files anymore, whether it be death or disability. And I look forward to that pamphlet having a blurb in it talking about when you can go on the State Bar website and you can register your inventory lawyer, or whatever we're going to call it.
Well, thank you, Alan. I got to say, I completely understand kind of these different perspectives. That was something when I was drafting it, trying to figure out, do we write something that's all encompassing? Do we write something specific to these emergency situations and unexpected situations that the bar deals with? So I think we can absolutely tweak this to make it clear what we're talking about, while also providing resources if someone reads it and they say, I know I need to do this, but I want to start thinking about winding my practice down so I don't have to find myself in that emergency situation. I'm realizing as we're talking, another resource that needs to be included in this is the Bar Association's Transitioning Lawyers Commission. They do a lot of good job. Daryl, to your point of this question of folks that they need to step down. That's what the TLC with the Bar Association is all about, to try to have that conversation in a respectful, gentle manner, to encourage folks to ultimately kind of see where they're at and take the appropriate steps for the benefit of everybody, clients themselves, their staff, et cetera. So maybe the resources page is where we can communicate the other aspects, not spending a lot of time, but just giving folks resources, things that they can talk to if they want to actually make the plan in advance. But otherwise, the substance can focus more on the unexpected situation and planning for that.
Thank you, Brian. And I know what you're trying to do too, is you're trying to say, well, if you're going to identify an inventory lawyer, you need to also provide information to the inventory lawyer so they know who your clients are, they know how to get into your computer and what your passwords are, et cetera. So I agree, it is a little bit difficult, but I also think it's a really good suggestion to be very clear about the purpose of this communication is around that death or disability, what happens in that event, and making sure you've identified someone. So we can work on the materials to sort of incorporate all of these good ideas, which I've written down, and I know Brian's making note of as well. One thing I want to go back to just to make sure we take care of it today, which is we've talked about that the staff can create some type of way to indicate who your inventory lawyer is when you pay your dues or at some other time. Would we like to make that recommendation as a group? Does anybody think that's not a good idea? Or want to discuss it further or have any other suggestions? I think what we could do is add that as our third recommendation. So again, Todd, good to see you. I saw that you came in. So here's what we've agreed to thus far. We all want to recommend a voluntary program to identify a successor or inventory lawyer, that we want to aggregate the currently existing public resources into one place and provide that information to the members of our bar so that they know how to, why this is important and how to identify a lawyer and how to engage in a succession planning process. And we want to recommend that staff create some type of process for lawyers to be able to identify that inventory lawyer or successor annually. Okay, high level, I know we've got a couple other things we want to talk about, but high level, the fourth recommendation that I had for Brian was that that we don't just create, a 4-page document that sits on a shelf, but that we recommend an educational, sort of an education program that might include an article in the Bar Journal, a CLE, a podcast, or so, a sort of a program, a communications program over the next several months to get the information out to the bar. So any discussion about that? I'm going to assume everyone thinks that's a good idea because you guys have talked about it before. Marcy?
I agree with all the above. I mean,
Okay.
The more information we can get out, the better. Is there any way in this publication, Brian, that you're working on that we could actually attach a form?
I recommended that too.
Yeah, because I mean, they're just some older lawyers that they're the ones, a lot of them are the ones that actually need to do this. And I worry that going onto their portal and doing all these things is just, I worry it won't get done. Whereas if you've got this form and they can just fill it out and send it into the bar, and it's got, please remit to whatever and have the address, attention of so-and-so. And it's like, what, 3 lines? I mean, it's not a lot.
Yeah, no, we could do that. And I think that's something that if we limit it with the focus being these unexpected situations, I think you're right that the form could be rather limited, straightforward, and something that, yes, to the extent that somebody can print it out, even just handwrite it and send it in, that should be very possible. So I'll put that on another page here.
Matt?
Thank you, Ashley. While we're doing this education process of the person naming the inventory lawyer, I think it's very important that we educate what the inventory lawyer does, because, we're sitting here dealing with, you need to name this inventory lawyer, but I mean, I can see myself going to Clark, I need you to be my inventory lawyer. Clark goes, what's that? So I think there needs to be some huge clarification, especially in smaller towns, that you're not stepping into it and you have conflicts of interest and confidentiality and things like that to concern yourself with. So I believe part of the education process should be for the role of the inventory lawyer and who you should look for.
Evan? That's great. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think this, Brian had mentioned PMBR, I think, in his notes, but a self-assessment tool, I think, would not necessarily be used, but checklists would be. And sort of coming back to what Matt was saying, we could have 2 different checklists. We could have one checklist for the inventory lawyer that sort of, identifies what that inventory lawyer needs to check off. And likewise, a checklist for the lawyer that that needs an inventory lawyer. But those would be fairly simple and straightforward, and it wouldn't be like a self-assessment tool. It could be used at the time it was needed.
Thank you, Evan. Other comments?
I want to just follow up and say, I think the as far as checklists, that's something that I'm realizing the resource that I created, there's a lot of tweaks. And I think if we focus for one on those, the steps that I listed, those need to be kind of reevaluated in the context of educating somebody on the inventory lawyer. And these are things to talk about with your inventory lawyer. And I absolutely was anticipating the in the membership portal process where somebody can identify somebody, that we will make educational resources available there. I mean, that's going to be a really easy spot for folks to say, to learn more about the inventory lawyer, click here, even after just a very quick little blurb. And the checklist, I think the resources page needs to be redone to explain what are in the bar associations and lawyers mutuals resources, because that's where you're going to find a bunch of checklists. I was just kind of looking at the different checklists that are available. The initial checklist, this is in the bar association's resource. The checklist for closing your practice, checklist for selling your practice, transitioning leadership in an office, initial checklist for protecting clients' interests and closing the office in an orderly manner. So there are a lot of good resources. And you're right, just saying, well, here's a resource from the bar association may not be entirely helpful. And it needs to be explained just a little bit more, give folks a little taste of what they will find if they actually click on it. So I'm going to revamp that resource so we can focus, as we've described here, and make it really clear what these different resources can offer should folks want to take additional steps.
So I think we have consensus around those 4 areas of our recommendations. And then we also agree that this memorandum is a really good start, but we want to modify it somewhat. So Brian is going to take our recommendations and do that. And so the only other area of consensus that we don't have is on the name of this lawyer. So some folks are uncomfortable with the term inventory lawyer, which I also did not love when I first heard it. It's a little clunky, but I understand why it's being proposed. Why don't we do this? Instead of having a roundtable discussion about what we think the title should be, why don't I recommend that folks provide that feedback to Brian on some recommendations that you might have or that you may have seen used in other jurisdictions. And then what Brian can do is prepare a report for us for the meeting in October, along with a modified memorandum of suggested resources. And and he can just include those suggestions about the naming in that email to all of us. And I think we are going to need to have one more meeting before our October meeting to sort of flesh out those final details. Marcy?
Couple of things. What do we call the lawyer now that the state bar?
Trustee, right?
What?
Trustee.
We call them the trustee. And actually a question that I'm sorry to interrupt you, Marcy, but was when let's say I named an inventory lawyer, Joe Smith is going to be my inventory lawyer and I die unexpectedly. Joe is my inventory lawyer, but does he have to be named a trustee by the state bar?
Yes. And
Okay.
Barry, I know, yeah, Barry's got that process down as well. And I think that's something so under the statute, we have the ability to petition the court for the appointment of a trustee. And that's why I avoided calling the person a trustee, because you don't want to create a presumption. The trustee is empowered by the court to access files that they ordinarily would not be able to access. That's all confidential information to take the control of the trust account and so forth. And so I wanted to reserve that term.
What if we called him like a recommended trustee or
That's exactly what I was thinking.
my proffered trustee, something like that. So then there's a tie and people don't think this is a totally different thing. Is it still too presumptive?
No, I think the recommendation, I think that's the thing. Part of how I would envision this form when you're registering somebody or naming somebody is that it would explain this person is not authorized
right
to act upon your unavailability. But this person, may be contacted by the state bar as a starting point for that process. And I think recommended trustee it's a recommendation. I don't think there's any presumption at that
It
point.
reminds me of like appointing a guardian for your children in your estate plan. So I think lawyers will be familiar with the concept. What does the group think about recommended trustee? Yes, medium, don't like it.
Brian, you don't like the term presumptive trustee? Because you think that.
Yeah, I don't like presumptive. I like recommended better personally.
Okay. I think recommended trustee sounds good.
All I know is if I hit the lottery, I'm going to give y'all a succession plan that would be nice and succinct. I promise you.
You're going to give all of us a succession plan, right?
I sure will.
Marcy?
Sorry, one more thought before it fleets out of my brain. Brian, it seems like what we're talking about too is short-term versus long-term succession planning. So maybe that could be a way to distinguish between the immediate need, which is to get everybody to go ahead and identify this recommended trustee, because we don't know that we have another day on this earth, and that's the immediate. So maybe we can couch it in terms of, the short-term planning versus long-term succession planning or something like that. I don't know, just a thought.
No, I think that's really helpful. I think that's what the pamphlet can really focus on, that this is dealing with those, not the long-term, and I see that's where one of my steps kind of conflates the two. It's not talking about where do you want your practice to go? That is a thought, but that's not a thought for this exercise. This exercise is about the short term. You can't come in tomorrow and you didn't plan for it. What's going to happen to your practice? So yeah, that's great.
Daryl, did you have something else?
No, I think Marcy had a very good thought, because when I think about succession plan, I'm thinking somebody that's winding down for good. That, I didn't even think about, okay, somebody might be short-term disabled, and they're going to plan on coming back. So I think that clarification is really, really good. Because when people start talking about succession plan, that means winding it down forever.
Alice dropped into the chat the term proposed trustee. So what I would recommend that we do is ask Barry and Brian and Alice and Catherine to decide what they think is the best term based on the feedback that we've provided, and run with that in the new memo that you send out, and we'll see how we feel about it. Does that sound good to the group? Okay. So we've got our 4 recommendations. It looks like we might have a name, and we still need to look at the sort of the memo, I'm just call it the memo, that we're going to recommend to the issues committee. And Brian is going to work on that. Brian, what do you think is your timeline on that?
That is $1 million question, Ashley, because I've got
you don't have anything else to do, so I thought.
Sadly, I'm hitting like the thick of my my presentations this quarter. So yeah, it's realistically, it's hard to say. If I get that uninterrupted time, I can get this done fairly quickly. I think that your point about having another meeting before the October meeting, it would be great if we can pull that off. We'll probably have to do that after the publication or the agenda publication deadline, which is going to be next Friday. Not this Friday, but the following on the 13th. Okay. And so maybe if we're looking for sometime around the week of the 16th, and we can just have a report to the issues committee, but have these things, we can distribute them before the meeting for certain. So I would say if you can give me a week, realistically, to try to make these changes, revamp the resource, and start drafting the overall report and recommendations, I think that's probably the most realistic timeline I can give you.
Okay, thank you. And I think a week would be great. a week is the 9th. If you want to try to meet before the 13th, I can try to make time, that week. I know we all probably will need, 45 minutes to review whatever Brian sends us. And then can hopefully, jump on and do a call and do a pretty quick meeting where we provide any additional feedback that we have and finalize the report. So how does all this sound to the group? And is there anything else we need to think about as we move forward? Sounds good. Brian, is there anything any of us can do to help you?
No, the one thing that I realized we kind of mentioned it, but never got an official thought process. I know, Evan, you said something about the PMBR kind of self-assessment module. We have not launched the cybersecurity one at this point. And so it's hard to make any recommendation that this topic be created as a new type of self-assessment, online self-assessment module, until we see how that functions, the success of it, and so forth. But if that's something, I guess I'm wondering, does the subcommittee want me to include that as a recommendation, just to kind of monitor the success of the cybersecurity module, and if appropriate, pursue development at a later date of a similar program for this topic?
Any feedback?
I'm looking at you, Eben, as the chair of the PMBR, and you're just laughing.
It wouldn't hurt to float it out there, but I think it's until we actually land this cybersecurity module, and I don't know what the status of that is, Alice. I know we've got to deal with Lawyers Mutual, but I don't know if we've got a contract with Standpoint Decisions yet that nails that down.
I think we're on the way there. We've got definitely have the money agreed to from Lawyers Mutual. So Evan, I thought we were had executed that contract, or at least we're very close. If not, I want to encourage this as a possibility, because if it turns out to be a good model for delivering information to members of the bar, I think it has a great application to the succession planning. It would be obviously voluntary. I think if you do the survey, the cybersecurity survey, you get CLE credit, right, Evan?
No.
No, you're not going to do CLE credit? No. Okay, that's interesting. Right. Well, I didn't know that. I see this as, if you make it something that's easy for people to work through questions and end up with a plan at the end of it, that gets you halfway there. But I would also use the carrot of CLE credits.
Well, I think it has to be approved by the CLE folks, and that's,
but
we can't, as a PMBR committee, we couldn't make it happen. It's got.
I guess I was looking for, you're going to recommend that to the CLE.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Right.
No
Well, that's all I'm suggesting. Speaking as the former director of the CLE program, I think you're pushing on an open door there. Getting CLE credit for it. So my idea from the succession planning perspective is, the carrot is, complete this 1 hour questions and answers, and at the end of it, you'll have the beginnings of a succession plan, and you get educated about the importance of it, both the short-term, issues where we're talking about, sudden illness or death, and also the long-term of like, well, you do want to retire someday, don't you? Or maybe you do, I don't know. So, but that's not critical. I think we do need to wait until the cybersecurity module is up and functioning, and we see how well received it is and all of that. So it's certainly something that just can come back and be revisited at some future date.
Okay, so I think we have a plan. Oh, Evan, did you have anything else?
No, I just want to go off topic for 1 second to Catherine, Jean, and Brian. I know you guys are busy, but I've been asked by the Mecklenburg County Bar to give a 1 hour CLE on the state bar to new lawyers while I'm up in Raleigh. So I'm going to get a conference room, but I need to get some more information, Catherine, Jean, from you, and you, Brian. So I'll be contacting you guys to get some statistics to put out there. Sorry to waste everybody's time on that, but I had them here as a captive audience. So
you're good, Eben. I've got you. I've got a presentation for you. I got you covered.
Okay. All right.
So thank you, everybody. I think we have a great plan. I just want to Thank Barry and Brian, who have been so supportive, Alice and Catherine for attending these meetings, and all of you for participating so well. I think we're going to have a good set of recommendations, and it's going to be really great for members of our bar. So thank you all for your hard work. We'll send out a poll to get another meeting scheduled in the next week or so.
Great.
Everybody have a great afternoon.